who will be speaking about sibling connections in foster care and beyond. Danielle is a senior attorney with the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland. She came to Legal Aid in 2013 as an Equal Justice Works Fellow, serving youth that are in and aging out of foster care in a variety of civil legal issues. And she deals with a variety of different populations now regarding education. Danielle and her husband are the parents of 3 boys, one adopted at age 18 after growing up in the foster care system, and they have also been foster parents. Jasmine is a former foster youth and has served on the Ohio Youth Advisory Board, the Mahoning County Youth Advisory Board, and with Foster Action Ohio. She has shared her insights on statewide panels, served as a mentor of young people transitioning from foster care to adulthood. So welcome to both Jasmine and Danielle.
Well, thank you very much, Betsy, and thank you so much for prioritizing this issue. It's very personal to Jasmine and I both, as you said. We'll just start by saying a little bit about why siblings are a personal issue for us, siblings in foster care and adoption. My son, whom we adopted at 18, we were connected with at 15. And so we've had the pleasure of seeing him learn about and connect with many siblings over the years. He's going to be 22 soon, and he's had the opportunity to get to know siblings with his mother and with other relatives. Also, unfortunately, he missed out on getting to know one of his siblings who passed away before they reconnected. So siblings has been a big theme and part of his reconnection with family. And so it's been a big part of our family journey as well. And as you mentioned, I am a lawyer that works on civil legal issues that are somewhat adjacent to the foster care system. So I work with a lot of families and youth involved in foster care. And often, sometimes what they're asking me is, how can I reconnect with siblings? And they're looking for legal ways to do that. And so that's what's informed some of the work that we've done together on the issue. So Jasmine, why don't you go ahead? You've got a visitor there. Tell us who it is and tell us a little bit about why siblings are so important to you.
Sorry, this is my little guy, Timothy. I grew up in foster care. I came from a family of 6. Right now, I was raised in a home by myself, and right now, I'm still trying to reconnect. I aged out in 2008, and even now, I'm still working on reconnecting. Like my one brother, I can't even find, who aged out like a little bit after me, and that's like one reason why it's important. And just so we can all have like at least the same family dynamic as well. Okay, I apologize. Timmy.
I just want to see. I don't want to take the phone.
Okay. No. I do apologize. I'm sorry. In the family dynamic.
Yeah. Don't worry, we've all been there. So we did want to just also start by saying a little bit about the rules around placing siblings together in foster care. And we'll talk a little bit about adoption as well, but just starting with the framework of placing siblings together in foster care. There are federal laws that require that the placement of siblings together be prioritized. And it's written into Ohio's child welfare plan, as many other state plans that say that you should place siblings together when they're removed from their home in the same foster care, kinship, or adoptive home, unless the state documents show it would be contrary to safety or the best interests of any of the siblings. And in the case of where siblings are not placed in the same home, there should be frequent visitation or ongoing interactions. And so that's kind of the legal framework of what's expected of child welfare to connect siblings. And, we look for some statistics to share, but there actually were not a lot of statistics for us to share with you about how often that's happening. I think partly that says how much we value that mandate and that connection of siblings if we don't have a lot of statistics around it. But also we just know anecdotally that there are so many instances where siblings are not placed with their siblings, or visitations or contact is canceled for any given reasons. Of course, There are barriers to placing siblings together. There aren't a lot of foster homes, period, let alone foster homes who are willing to take sibling groups. Sometimes there are different levels of needs of siblings. And so there might be someone who needs more support in a residential setting and someone who is placed in a more general setting. But even when they are placed apart, often we see those contacts and those visits aren't always happening. And often I hear a lot of professional concerns about how visits impact a child's behavior. And of course, there's always concerns about transportation and logistics. But when it comes down to it, those barriers take away some of the good parts of what a sibling can do to impact someone who's been removed by their family. So instead of going through a long list of those benefits or some of the challenges, we wanted to just delve a little bit into Jasmine's story and talk a little bit about siblings and how it influenced her foster care journey. And so, she started to tell her story a little bit, but we also wanted to start with a video testimony that Jasmine created on this topic. So I'm going to take a minute and share my screen to do that.
Hello, my name is Jasmine Hardy, and I'm with the Ohio Youth Advisory Board, and I'm asking for foster youth to be placed together upon removal from their homes with their biological siblings. Before I start, let me ask you this question. How are you doing social distancing? What are your feelings? You may answer with depression has set in, anxiety, anger, fear, and a whole list of other things. So now let's ask this question. Who do you go to? Who do you turn to in this time? The person you live with. It's probably one, as well as the person you talk to on the phone. So, couple your emotions with the emotions of a young child. So, a child has just been removed from his home, his or her home, and they are placed into a home with someone else that they don't even know. They lost their support system, their comfort, their sense of comfort, their sense of stability, even their sense of belonging. Their confidence may lack, anxiety have set in, as well as a list of other things, and their real authentic love. Siblings also play an important role in developing a child, as well as their self-esteem. Think about that for a moment. Now that all that is lacking, and they have lost that, who can they turn to? They're not in the same home with someone. They can't call someone on the phone. It's not that easy for us, So let me ask you, why not keep siblings together? How do you feel? How would you feel? How is this social distancing working for you again?
I just really love that as it connected to all of our experiences in our separations.
What if you could reverse your diabetes without meds or a special diet in just 4 weeks by doing this simple ritual every day before 10 a.m.?
Okay, sorry about that. So I just love how Jasmine connected that to all of our experiences. And so we just wanted to, break down your story a little bit. So Jasmine, could you start again by reminding us, how many siblings did you say you have?
It was a family of 6 of us. So 6 siblings, it was two and two placed together. And then me and my older sibling was placed apart. And right now I have connections with 5 out of the 6. I'm still trying to locate the 6th one.
Yeah, and I think when we talked, you said that you were placed in foster care a few times, right? There was a couple different placements.
I went to one foster care when I was younger. I don't remember much, but I was placed with my younger sibling. Then I went back home to my biological mom. And then we went back into foster care where I spent a day in a group home, which was kind of nerve-wracking. I remember it was right after 9/11 actually. So that was a depressing time for me. And then we went, and then I ended up going to my former foster mom upon my request. But I was separated. I didn't know I would be separated from my sister at the time.
Yeah. So the first time you were with your younger sister, and then the second time you were with all of your siblings. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. And then you were alone too. So you kind of had the range of experiences of being separated from your siblings. Were there specific concerns you had about being separated from your siblings?
Yes, ma'am. So the brother actually that I can't locate now, he when we were younger and we were placed with my grandma in between that time, he was hit by a car and so he had seizures and we were also like made sure he got like his medicine and stuff one time. So that was always an issue for me wondering if he had that. And then if, like I said, it was right before 9/11. So I was also scared of like what can happen to them. And my older sister, I used to be able to talk to her about everything, and being separated from her, I didn't have that bond or anyone I feel like I can talk to and trust.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you were placed with some of your siblings, how did you feel about being removed?
When I was placed with them, we were able to like talk about our situation, which helped us cope and get through it. As well as just like play like normal kids do and have that understanding of what each other is going through.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, so being able to compare that to how you felt when you were placed without your siblings, did you have I mean, I know looking back on it with time, you have a sense of how that was different for you?
Yeah, I wasn't placed with them for a long period of time, so that's kind of hard. But for that short time that I was placed with them, it was like a lot of bonding. We were able to, oh, I remember mommy did this, but this is how we overcame it. We would hug each other. We had that authentic love, like where you can hug each other and have that support. Like, well, if I was to talk to somebody I feel in my foster home, they would be like, oh, what are you, oh, well, kind of type thing. Or it wasn't that real love where they can understand my situation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really interesting what you said about sharing memories too, because obviously when you're a kid, you don't always have all the memories of everything that's happened to you before, but when you talk with your siblings about it, they can kind of remind you of pieces about it and like you said, how you got through some things. It's really interesting.
Actually, I was just talking to my sister the other day, and she was telling me about how my mom, which I didn't remember because I was younger, and she was telling me how before we even got taken, how our relationship with my mom was, or our mom was. So like, that even then now.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Being able to have that connection now still shapes you. Because I think I remember you talking about how without your siblings, you kind of had a loss of identity.
Yes, ma'am. I feel like I fell into depression. I didn't know who I'm still trying to understand who I am, but I really didn't know who I am. I'm like, I didn't know. I felt alone and like scared.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. The identity and security were kind of the two things that you talked about that you felt.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So how did you stay connected with your siblings when you were in separate placements?
We would have like an hour-long meeting. I mean, like we would go to what's called the Hope House, and we would have an hour-long meeting like every Monday out of the month, like one Monday out of the month. And so we would meet up for an hour. But then once my older brother or my brother got shipped off, it would be just some of us. We didn't always consistently, but for the most part, maybe an hour out of the month, some of us.
Yeah.
And then
I don't think I asked you this before, but did you go to school with any of your siblings when they were placed in different homes?
no, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Okay. And then the Hope House, was that a visitation center? Like that's what's happened at Hope House?
Yes, ma'am. It was like a visitation center at the bottom. We also had I think like a little small meeting area as well, because we had sometimes we have independent living there as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember what those visits were like?
It was just in one little room, and we would just have a little bit of toys and a table around, and we would sit there and we'll talk. But most of the time, we were kids, so we were ready to get back to our normal lives because we didn't understand. But we would sit there, talk and play until it was time to go, and then everybody would cry because they had to leave.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you connect on the phone also, or was that hard when you were little?
We tried, but oftentimes for me, different situations. But when I would get punished, like okay, if I got in trouble, I couldn't use the phone, and that counts, and not talking to siblings. Or like I will say that my foster mom, she tried when we had to go to respite, which is like when my foster mom had to have a babysitter outside of herself. she would try to have us go to respite with my biological sister. Well, I would try, or sibling, but other than that, not really.
Yeah, this was before a lot of social media, I imagine, right? So it was harder to connect that way.
Oh yes, it's,
Yeah. So what were your, so you ended up turning 18 while you were in foster care, right?
yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what were your family connections like after you aged out?
They got a little bit closer. I got closer to my mom, who didn't stay too far from me. And then my sisters, like actually I just had my siblings over, which this is something new. We're having all the family over and stuff like that. And we're getting to know things that we didn't miss. And even parts of family history that I didn't know that was very important to my family that we should know.
Yeah. Was that kind of the first thing that you did upon aging out, reach out to reconnect, or where were you on that journey?
When I first aged out, I think I was just calling and constantly because they were still in care. Like we were calling, keep in touch. Then we lost each other because some people got like some of my siblings got mixed up in like West Virginia and different areas of the state, country and state. And so once we all aged out, we just kind of like reached out, scrambled to get everybody's number and everything. Seemed which, like I said, we're still looking for one sibling.
Yeah. Do you know about how long it took you to find everyone else?
My oldest sister, we probably found, it probably took us like, I want to say 6 years. It was a while.
Yeah. When we were talking, you mentioned your first Thanksgiving after you aged out. Do you remember what that was like for you?
My first Thanksgiving after we aged out. I actually didn't. I remember I was at YS, I was in the dorms and I actually spent that alone because I didn't have anybody with me. So it was just me in the dorms. And then even after that, sometimes I would go with like for holidays and stuff, I would go with my now best friends, but my my roommates back in college.
Yeah, and just a lot different being a guest at Thanksgiving versus now reconnecting with your family, right?
Yes, man. Oh, a lot different. The conversations, I feel like then it's like, although they're sweet and stuff, like I couldn't like engage in a conversation, especially when it was about family. But now I can like, we can engage a little bit more and reminisce about our memories, which makes me feel a part and belong, versus like an outcast.
Yeah, I think that stuck out to me because one of my first entrances into foster care in Cleveland was the Thanksgiving dinners that Foster Action puts on. And so have you been to those as well?
I've been to one of them, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so it's a nice substitute, and it's a nice time for the holidays, but it's not the same as having that connection where you feel like you belong, like you said. I mean, I think everyone feels like they belong at those, but it's a different thing. Yeah. So do you know other foster youth that had experiences about being placed with their siblings or not?
My former foster youth, she was actually blessed with the opportunity. She had a baby as well. She was placed with, and then she was placed with her sister as well, but not so many. Wait.
Yeah, that kind of sticks out to you because you remember they were placed together.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, is there anything else as we've kind of gone back through your story that you wanted to make sure you share as part of that story?
I think that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the other piece of this conversation and the reason we talked about it as foster care and beyond is because a lot of the advocacy that we've been talking about with Adoption Network
What happened to you?
is both for youth in foster care who already have that legal right to be placed together and have contact, but then also for youth that have been adopted. I mentioned some of the youth that have come to me. I think one of the first ones I remember was a young man who had aged out of foster care, but his younger sibling had been adopted, and that child's adopted family did not want him to have contact with the child. And he really, I learned through research, had no way of reconnecting. In Ohio, adoption severs all legal connections to the parents' relatives, so including siblings. And it actually specifically says it makes you a legal stranger. And so no connections can branch from that parental relationship that's severed, either through adoption or through the termination of parental rights. And so I also know through our advocacy, stories have come up about youth who had aged out of foster care, and another was adopted. And then if that person passed away, even as an adult, then there are no inheritance able to pass between the families. And so it's the kind of thing that doesn't make sense to people, maybe as they're in the lived experience of how that connection could possibly be severed when the sibling didn't do anything. There was nothing wrong about what happened with the sibling, and there was no decision to terminate because of the sibling relationship, but simply because of that parental relationship. And Ohio law also only allows petition for relatives of parents. So again, once that parental relationship is severed, there's no way really to go into court and ask that you be allowed to have visitation to maintain a relationship that may have been really important to you as you were younger, as you were growing up, or you're looking to reconnect and to help form that piece of your identity. Recently, actually, though, there was a new amendment as part of the Ohio budget that clarified that when someone enters foster care, then the parents of an adopted person who was their sibling can be notified. So that's really the only exception to when adoption doesn't completely sever it, that if a family has adopted a child and another sibling enters foster care, but really it's the right of the adopted parent then to be notified, not the sibling themselves. And so of course we all know stories of adoptions that don't maintain connections, and so that older sibling, even as an adult, would not have the right to be notified, but only that adoptive parent. But it is interesting to note that took a really broad definition of sibling, and they said that they were looking at any formal legal sibling, any person considered a sibling, if not for the disruption of parental rights. So that might mean a step sibling. If you grew up in the same home and you consider someone your sibling, even if you don't share any blood connection, then your adoptive parent could get notification of a sibling entering foster care. So again, I think, a lot of our concern was about how these relationships are defined by the adults, and are controlled completely by the adults, regardless of the sibling relationship and what it may have meant to the people involved. And so one thing we wanted to make sure we talked about today, and I'll throw it back to Jasmine, is just to talk a little bit about the ways that foster parents and adoptive parents, or caseworkers who are working with those people can promote sibling connections.
Thank you. So one way I think that when they have siblings, sometimes you can try to find a home where there is siblings together. If there's 2 beds available, try to put the kids together in that home versus there's a single parent home. Could be one way also to sorry, I'm a little nervous. You can try to put them together in that way. You can talk more about sibling relationships. Even if the kids can't be placed together for emergency situations, try to have more visitation, try to put them in a localized area as well. Because I do understand, which we want to keep them together, but I also is try to keep them in the same neighborhood, on the same street if possible. Send them to the same school, or us to the same school.
Yeah. Well, and I think one thing from your story that jumped out to me was, not using sibling relationships as a punishment. Yeah. Making sure that those phone calls are an exception to any sort of phone or yeah.
Sorry. So that's true as well. So when when you're getting punished, like under punish them, but punish us, but not from sibling relations in any way, shape, or form. And then when there is respites that need it done, or any type of like babysitting, I guess you could say, allow the siblings to try to have their siblings placed together in that regard too, or with another family member during that respite time, if possible.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like you just said, you know, sometimes there are emergency situations or there are different needs, and it's just really important to keep looking back at that connection. I think I have seen, again, anecdotally, so many scenarios where there was a need to stop visitation or a need to pause contact, and then that just goes on and on. And so I think it's really important to build into our practices and policies that we look at this on a very regular basis to just really honor how important that connection is for siblings, because this may be cliche. I think this is said a lot in siblings trainings, but it's the longest relationship a lot of people will have is with that sibling, and it helps to really define a lot of identity. And so making sure that we realize how important that is, and doing everything we can to preserve it. And as foster parents or adoptive parents, sometimes promoting it when other things may seem more important. You know, I'm obviously not sharing too much of my son's story here today, but there's a lot of things going on in a young person's life, but continuing to point out how important siblings are and making the effort to keep them connected, I think is really important at a time when not a lot of people, as young adults, always spend time prioritizing family connections. And so helping to make that important for your young person or young adult as a parent, I think is a really important thing. And then we also just wanted to share a little bit of the policy advocacy that has been going on in Ohio. And one thing that I've referenced a couple times is Adoption Network's efforts to create a siblings connections bill. It was introduced, I think, back in 2018, but if you don't know much about the legislature, it has to be reintroduced every year. So it's not currently pending, but it was a bill to allow siblings to petition a court, a juvenile court, to have visitation with their siblings, whether they were placed in foster care or in an adoptive placement. And so that's as simple as it was. Obviously, there were concerns about how do you define sibling, who gets to take advantage of this, and concerns about how does a youth get to court, how do they get to petition on their own. But we really thought that it was the best way to ensure that there was a balance between the youth's right to connect with their siblings and then getting it in front of a court that would then make a best interest decision about whether it was in the sibling's best interest to have that visitation and connection, rather than allowing that relationship that's so important to the young people to be completely defined by the adults in their lives. And Jasmine, I know you were really involved in the recent push for a youth ombudsman. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
So I know it was a bill to try to get youth to localize together. It was a bill to try to get youth localized or together in the same home. And you want to go more? Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So yeah, so the idea of the ombudsman is a neutral party that you could call and say, you know, I have not had contact with my sibling in a long time, or I have concerns about my foster placement, or all the different rights that youth have while they're in foster care. It's someone that the youth could call and share those concerns with. So there is now an ombudsman for youth and caregivers that was established through the current budget. But, you know, what we've heard from Foster Action Ohio is that it's really important to have that separate ombudsman for youth because of the possible conflicts that might come and just the understanding the importance of the youth experience. And so I know that Siblings was a big push as part of that concern for a youth ombudsman. And the other thing I wanted to highlight that I think either of us have been very involved in is that there is a recently proposed bill of foster youth bill of rights, which specifically would include weekly visits for siblings unless the court orders otherwise. And so again, just being really explicit about how often those connections should happen and that it should be reviewed by a court. So that's just a brief description of some of the work, some of the stories, some of the themes around siblings connections. And we wanted to see if there were conversation topics or questions that other participants wanted to throw in.
So Jasmine, I love your shirt, very fitting for this evening's topic. So thanks for wearing that about sisterhood. So there was a lot of admiration for Jasmine's video that came up in the chat. And then there's a few questions that were submitted as well. I had a question about, and I don't think you covered this, or if you did, I didn't hear it. I've even heard social workers, short of adoption, saying that if parental rights were terminated, that siblings didn't maintain that legal connection. So Danielle, I don't know, you know, where the law stands on that, or if you've heard that as well.
Yeah, you're saying so the kids are still in foster care and
the kids in foster care, and yeah. Like, I think a lot of people, I had never thought about this until we started getting active on this issue several years ago, that siblings are related to each other legally because they have the same parents. And so one of the things that we were trying to do in the change of law that we were promoting was to create a more direct legal relationship, because sometimes I've even heard, you know, not necessarily that somebody's adopted, but just that because they don't have the legal tie to their parents, if parental rights are terminated, then some people would say then they're no longer legal siblings, even during that period while they're still in foster care.
Yeah, and someone on the call might have more recent legal knowledge of that, but what I remember from the research was that the termination of parental rights didn't specifically talk about other relatives being legal strangers in the same way that the adoption statute does. But right, yeah, you're only related through parents, and so if you're severed from the parents, then I think that is a reasonable interpretation of our current law. I don't think it's necessarily the best one, but I think it's reasonable, and it could be an understanding that sub-agencies have to try to protect privacy too, because right, that's the other balance, is if they're legal strangers, then we shouldn't be sharing information or promoting the connection. So I think that is a position that I've heard, and I think it's based on my memory of the laws in 2018 is a reasonable interpretation.
So like Jasmine, in your situation, you knew that you had 5 siblings, that there were 6 of you total. I've seen this maybe in situations where there's a sibling who's way younger, and you know the system might take the opinion that, well, they're not really related to each other. They're not real. I've heard, they're not really siblings. So like, why even inform them of each other, type of thing. So that's can be an extreme interpretation, but. So we do have a question or a comment. Let's see. There are opportunities for visitation in Ohio. Are there opportunities for visitation in Ohio for siblings to create normalcy, such as meeting siblings at a park or going on activities together rather than meeting in an office or a visitation center, the way that you talked about?
Well, I know for us, like, children's service agency does have like little parties. You can say like during the holidays they have like a Christmas party where the foster youth can come and mingle with other foster youth as well as like foster parents, and then they have one in the summertime as well, and then there's those times where for respite.
Yeah, and I think when I've seen the most normal visits, it's because the foster parents are getting the siblings together on their own. It's less about those agency mandated visits and more about just what's happening organically between the families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen situations, granted it's an office setting, but people are using Adoption Network family programs where we have children's programs along with parent programs, and making sure that they come to the same program so that their kids are together during that time while they're attending the program, at least, hopefully among other times that they're getting together as well. Some other questions. People, I think, might be here from some other states. Do you have some knowledge about other states and what types of protections or options there are for siblings to stay connected?
Yeah, and I'm hoping that the people from the other states will chime in if this sounds right, or if you're surprised to hear that this is what we found in your laws. But one of the first models we were looking at was Arkansas. And in Arkansas, sibling visitation that is ordered before adoption doesn't end with adoption. So it continues past that adoption barrier. Of course, that's an interesting question then if they weren't ordering a sibling visitation because of a termination of parental rights, maybe that means it's not as widespread as we might hope. But also after adoption, siblings, parents, guardians, or a guardian ad litem could petition for visitation to establish after the adoption. One thing we liked about the California law was that caseworkers are specifically required to explain why siblings aren't placed together, rather than kind of checking off a box, yes, we made reasonable efforts. That's what I've heard in some hearings. Have you made reasonable efforts to place them together? Yes. Instead, in California, it's kind of the flip. Why aren't they placed together? And you have to provide a specific reason for that. And the suspension of visits are reviewed at each court hearing. So again, just kind of bringing up the topic over and over again. And any person can petition the court for visitation, meaning just beyond siblings as well, but allowing that relationship to fall under there. And then they also have meetings to discuss adoption contracts and the contact that might be part of a post-adoption contract. And of course, that's a whole nother, I think that might be a whole nother session about post-adoption contracts and whether they're enforceable. But there are quite a few states that make post-adoption contracts enforceable. And so if it's written into that contract that siblings will be able to continue to have visitation, then someone could go to court and enforce that contract.
There's a question in chat about situations where maybe one foster family wants to maintain sibling contact, but the other family isn't willing or interested.
Just about what to do about that.
What happens in those situations?
Yeah.
I know there's probably a variety, but.
Yeah. And I mean, I think this is a situation that our bill may not have gotten at with Adoption Network, because it's within the foster care context versus allowing for the petition post-adoption. But I think the reason we focus post-adoption is because there is not an agency that has a requirement to maintain that condition, that relationship involved. So hopefully the first call would be to the agency to say, this relationship is not being promoted in the way that it should be. Maybe now the Ombudsman will be a resource for that, because, it's in federal law that there should be that connection and the frequent contacts. Of course, federal law doesn't control the other foster family as much as it controls the agency, but the agency indirectly has to control and promote that relationship.
So what can people do to be helpful to promote effective public policy on these issues? And what would be the benefits to the child welfare system if they were successful?
Yeah. Jasmine, do you want to talk a little bit about how you've been involved? We saw your video testimony already. How are the other ways that you've been involved on this issue?
Well, one way was like the video testimony, as well as I did a panel back in Mahoney County, where I'm from, where we tried to get foster youth and foster parents to come. And one of the things I was taught, we were talking about was siblings and how important it is to have siblings together. So the panels in the individual communities are it's good. And then even just at work, there's people I say, hey, I can tell you make a great foster parent. So talking to them in that way, promoting just different things, sharing stories, testimonies with youth. I seen a commercial that here in Mahoney County where they had siblings and together, and they were just talking. I mean, they weren't like together, but they were like talking about them, and I think that was a good idea as well. Testimonies, newsletters, updates.
Yeah, I think sharing your story is what you do, right? That you've been so generous in sharing the story. And obviously not everyone has as personal a story, except that we all have sibling relationships and can think about what those have meant to us. I guess we don't all have sibling relationships, but we all can think about what family connections have meant to us. And, you know, Adoption Network obviously has been active on this issue and has a public policy committee that's always talking about ways to further the concerns and the issues around siblings. Betsy mentioned the Public Policy Day that will be coming up. That's a great way for people to get involved on the ground level. We provide the information about the issues that we're concerned about, and you can talk directly with legislators about them. I don't know, Betsy, what are other ways? What do you think are other ways people can get involved?
Well, I really like, Jasmine, you know, sharing your voice and just making sure that this is visible to a variety of different people. One of the things that I've learned about legislators over the years is I remember when I very first got involved in trying to have a voice on public policy issues about adoption and child welfare. I felt like legislators were like up on this pedestal and, you know, might not want to listen or might feel like they knew. And one of the things that I've discovered is they're just people like you and I, and they are called to understand a lot of different issues. And so, you know, going in to speak to the legislators about our lived experiences shares a perspective that they wouldn't necessarily hear. I've had a lot of I actually had one legislator on a related issue tell me that she knew all about this because she watched Oprah. And this was years ago when Oprah was still on. You know, I've had other people tell me, well, my next door neighbor's son, blah, 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 blah. You know, people take a lot sometimes out of just one person's experience that they might have heard. And so to shift that, I think, you know, sharing a powerful personal story can make a really big difference. A lot of times people, I think, in testimony are going to listen to statistics and facts, but the story is what's going to stick with them probably the most out of everything that they might hear during that hearing.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that I do when I start to get really concerned about an issue is just keep track of the stories that go along with it. And I know that's part of what we've done is reach out to different youth and record stories about their experiences. And so probably most people on this call have contact with some youth or have some stories in mind about siblings. And so just keeping track of those for when advocacy opportunities come up, and obviously with permission of the person sharing that story.
So one question I had was, one of the things that I've heard from kids over the years is I've heard teens or young adults say that they didn't want to be adopted because they thought that that would once and for all sever the tie with their siblings. And so they didn't want to, if they had siblings that were still in care, they didn't want to take the risk of being adopted, that they felt like that would be the kiss of death to that relationship. And I've always found that really sad. You know, I don't think any child should have to choose between permanency and stability and maintaining connections with their past and their present family. And so, you know, ways to provide that continuity. And so that's one of the things that made me first even, I think, start thinking about this topic was, you know, both and instead of, you know, one or the other type outcomes. So I don't know if you've got any experience with that or, you know, if you've seen that.
Yeah, what about you, Jasmine? Have you, from any of your co-advocates, heard about that, about the turning down an opportunity for adoption?
I have not. Most of my advocates or people I know, they have not had the opportunity to be adopted. But I do know, in my personal story, like I said, if when I asked for my previous foster parent, if I knew that I was going to be separated from my sister and not placed with her, I probably would not have asked, even though she was familiar with me. I would have preferred to be placed with my biological sister, but it was too late at the time. So
Jasmine, what is the age spread of your siblings? Like the oldest to the youngest, how many years?
So the youngest is, 24, and then the oldest will be 30. Well, no, wait, I lied. 36. So it's a pretty.
So about a 12-year spread of the 6 siblings. Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, I will just say, from personal experience, connections to biological family can really factor into an older child adoption. So I definitely can see that being a part of the conversation for youth.
Good. Any other questions from anyone else who's listening before we wrap up?
Betsy, not so much a question, but I do have some opportunities for people to get involved to help support sibling relationships, aside from Adoption Network Cleveland, which is absolutely incredible and doing a lot of public policy work to help promote sibling relationships. But also, depending on your state, there's something called Camp to Belong, where it promotes sibling relationships. So whether you're adopted or you're still in foster care, youth can spend a week together and have events that create normalcy. And specifically, if anyone is coming from Colorado, there is an opportunity for siblings then who engage in this camp to also throughout the year have activities that promote sibling relationships. And then other ways to promote sibling relationships. I know one of the biggest issues is actually having people to help transport siblings and promote this relationship, because a lot of caseworkers are so busy and foster parents are so busy. So there are opportunities to sign up to volunteer to help even just drive and support these sibling relationships. But in addition, I just wanted to thank Jasmine so much for being so vulnerable and being willing to share, because the other thing that's so great about Adoption Network Cleveland is that Adoption Network Cleveland has the whole adoption constellation, and people who are listening who may be adoptive parents and can now see the importance of sibling relationships and how much that meant to you in your life. So thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank
Bethany. So Bethany, you brought up about driving transportation. That's a really big issue. That can be a big issue for siblings. It can be a big issue for people, getting to programs or getting to different things. And I think the Thanksgiving event came up earlier. So I'll just put a plug in for that next weekend. Because of the state of COVID right now, there's only one Thanksgiving gathering for the state, which is in Columbus next weekend. Typically there's regional gatherings. And I've been to a lot of them. I think Danielle and Jasmine, you've been to them as well. And I've definitely seen, adult siblings or siblings in foster care use that gathering as an opportunity to make sure to get together. And there is a need for transportation for kids and youth and young adults to get to that event next Saturday. So if anybody wants to go to Columbus, there's definitely people who are interested in going to that event if you'd like to give a ride. It looks like we've got one more question. As an adoptive parent, is it inappropriate to reach out to another adoptive parent to rekindle a sibling relationship if the clause in adoption law considers them legal strangers? So Danielle, I'll let you.
I was going to say, this is not a legal opinion. This is, I don't think it's inappropriate. I really don't. I mean, I think it's about honoring your child and what your child wants and what you think is good for your child. And I mean, I'm sure, I know based on our advocacy, others do not necessarily agree. And so you may get a variety of responses, but I don't think anything about how the law defines relationships should stop us from trying to promote what's best for our kids.
So to reinforce, it's the legal separation or the legal severing of that relationship doesn't mean that it's illegal to reach out. So that, just to make that clear, I've known lots and lots of adoptive parents over the years who have searched for or might know where other siblings are placed through whatever way, and have reached out. And sometimes those relationships can take a long time to blossom. Sometimes the other family might be hesitant, especially if maybe they were placed with more recently and they want to let things kind of settle and gel in their family. But I've seen lots of situations where people embrace that, either early on in the contact or, maybe later on in the contact. So you don't want to be obnoxious and, calling somebody every day, but you also want to let that family know that you're thinking of them. I've known families that sent the other family Christmas cards once a year, during maybe a period of silence, just to let them know they were still there and they were still thinking of them. And, I've seen a lot of those situations at some point then in the future blossom. So we're going to wrap up in a minute. Any last words, Danielle?
No, I think I just wanted to reiterate one thing Jasmine said when we were first talking. Just, it's interesting to take a step back from this whole issue and just think about how other cultures value families and connections. And Jasmine, I don't know if you're going to remember, you brought up some examples of how sometimes when people are in jail in other cultures, in Mexico specifically, people are still allowed to have contact with their family. And I think to us, it's just a completely different mindset that we're all about, the rules and regulations and what has to happen and who has to go where. But it is possible to decide to value family over all else. And so I think that we maybe have to take a step back and rethink those priorities and connections and make sure that we're just doing everything we can to make sure that people who are going through a major trauma, by any respect of the word, have all the resources they can have to recover from and deal with that trauma. And about you, Jasmine, you have any last words?
I just want to first thank everybody again, and then like what I do, like I was telling Bethany, back in Mexico, especially, like they have an area for moms where if they have a kid, the kid can be in the jail with them. Obviously, it's like I was reading it online. I can try to find the link where when I found it at, and it's just we need that same type of thing here. With coping and everything. And like, once again, I want to take it back with COVID, because we're all social distancing and stuff, and like try to put yourself in the kids' shoes. Although you're an adult, try to put yourself in kids' shoes. And how does it feel for you to not be able to hug your loved one that you're next to or whatever? And that's kind of like the same situation. So that is why, like, putting yourself, that's why children connections are very important, as well as like when you get older, medical problems and stuff like that. I didn't know when I had my son, they were asking me questions, I couldn't answer them. But now that I have that deeper relationship with my siblings and my family, there's questions that I can answer that I wouldn't have never known. So those ways, and just the love and everything.
Thank you. You both did a great job, and such a important topic. So thank you. I just put my email in the chat. So if you're interested in this topic or being part of Lobby Day or being involved in any other way, you can be in touch. We would love to hear from you. Thank you both to Jasmine and for Danielle for preparing for this evening and sharing so much of yourselves and your personal story, Jasmine. It's very touching to hear and to bring it to life. So I really appreciate both of you for being part of this. So thanks for joining us this evening, everybody. As probably most of you know, Adoption Network Cleveland is a nonprofit organization. We are membership based, and you can check out our website to see about our different programs or how to join or how to sign up for other events that are coming up on our calendar. I think I put the link to the calendar in the chat so you can scroll back. We do have our next Monday evening speaker series next Monday, which is about loss and healing. So thank you again, and have a nice rest of your evening.